I remember the moment vividly. It was late at night, and I was sitting alone in a small, dimly lit room. The air was heavy, almost sacred in its silence, and the only light came from a flickering candle on the table beside me. My heart was weary. My dreams, once blazing bright, had dimmed under the weight of repeated failures and endless bills. I had done everything I thought I was supposed to do. I worked hard, I prayed hard, but nothing seemed to move. My pockets were empty, my future uncertain, and my faith, though still alive, was trembling. It was in that very hour of surrender, when I had reached the end of my own strength, that something supernatural happened. As I sat there, my tears mixing with whispered prayers, I felt a gentle stillness wrap around me. My thoughts quieted, my breathing slowed, and deep within my spirit, I heard two words. Two simple words that cut through the heaviness and filled the room with light. They were not loud, not thunderous, but they carried the weight of heaven. The moment I heard them, everything inside me shifted. The same room that had felt like a prison just seconds before now became a place of revelation. Those two words didn't come from my own thoughts. They came from a divine place, from the spirit that speaks when you're still enough to listen. I didn't understand their full meaning at that moment, but I knew that they carried the key to everything I had been praying for. It was as though God himself had leaned down and whispered directly into my heart. Here is your answer. Suddenly, all my fears felt small, all my doubts melted away. I could almost feel the presence of angels in that little room, reminding me that I was not forgotten, that heaven had not been silent, that my time was coming. The words were so simple, yet they carried such power that they began to echo inside me. I kept repeating them again and again, and every time I said them, I felt a spark, a flicker of faith being reignited. It was as if those two words unlocked something ancient and eternal within my soul. They awakened memories of promises I had once believed, dreams I had buried, and a faith I had allowed to sleep. I realized in that moment that God doesn't always give long explanations or complicated instructions. Sometimes he gives a whisper, a phrase, a seed, and that seed, when planted in faith, grows into abundance. That night I didn't receive money. I didn't receive a miracle I could touch. What I received was far greater, a revelation that would change my life forever. Those two words became my compass, my mantra, my daily declaration. I began to write them everywhere, on scraps of paper on the wall near my bed, even on my heart. Every morning, I spoke them. Every night before sleep, I whispered them again. The more I repeated them, the stronger I felt. It was as though those two words carried a living energy that began to transform my thoughts, my emotions, and my faith. Days turned into weeks, and though nothing visible had changed, something deep within me had. My prayers became bolder, my vision clearer. I started walking with a new kind of confidence, not because I had seen the answer, but because I had heard it. The world around me hadn't shifted yet, but the world inside me had. And that I learned is where every miracle begins, not outside but within. From that night on, those two words became my foundation. Whenever doubt tried to creep in, I repeated them. Whenever fear tried to choke my faith, I declared them louder. They reminded me that breakthrough doesn't begin with money, opportunities, or luck. It begins with revelation, and revelation always comes before manifestation. Those two words were my divine revelation, and though I didn't know it then, they were the very words that would one day open the gates of abundance and make me a millionaire. Because wealth, I discovered, doesn't start in your hands. It starts in your mind. It starts in your heart. It starts with what you hear and what you believe. That night, heaven spoke through two words. And when I chose to believe them, everything about my destiny began to shift. When I first began to act upon those two words, I noticed something peculiar. Nothing around me changed, but something inside me had caught fire. It was as though a small flame had been lit in the center of my chest. And each time I repeated those words, that flame grew stronger, brighter, more alive. I would wake up every morning and speak them into the air like a declaration, like a seed being planted into invisible soil. Though I saw no immediate result, I could feel the energy of faith building. Those two words became the rhythm of my heartbeat, the melody of my prayers, and the language of my new reality. Faith has a strange way of working. It does not first change your surroundings, it changes you. I began to see differently, to think differently, To speak differently, the moment I held onto those two words, my inner world began to shift from despair to expectancy. Every time I whispered them, I saw a new image forming in my imagination. I saw myself walking through doors that had once been closed, holding checks with my name written in bold letters, standing in rooms filled with opportunity and favor. I saw myself free from debt, free from fear, free from the weight of limitation. That inner picture became so clear, so alive, that it began to feel more real than my current circumstance. Dr. David Yonggi Cho once taught that the imagination is the womb of creation. If you can conceive it in your heart and hold it in your faith, it must eventually come to pass. I began to practice that principle every single day. When I had no money, I still saw wealth. When I had no clients, I still saw success. When I had no support, I still saw myself being celebrated. I started living as if it was already done. My words shifted from I hope to I have. My prayers turned from begging into thanksgiving. I stopped praying from a place of lack and began praying from a place of victory. The change was so subtle that most people around me didn't notice. To them, I was still struggling, still trying to make ends meet. But deep within, something powerful was unfolding. The soil of my soul had received the seed, and though it wasn't visible yet, growth had already begun. I started to write down ideas that came into my spirit. New strategies, business concepts, creative ways to generate income. Some of them seemed impossible, but I wrote them anyway. I knew that faith doesn't ask if it's possible. Faith simply believes that with God, all things are possible. Every time doubt whispered, "Oh, just imagining things," I countered with those two words. I didn't argue with fear. I replaced it. I understood that my tongue was a tool of creation, and my words were building my future. When I spoke lack, I experienced lack. But when I spoke abundance, the atmosphere began to respond. My energy shifted, and suddenly, people began to notice me. Conversations opened. Opportunities started to appear in places I had never looked before. It was as if heaven was rearranging itself to honor the faith I had planted through those two words. Even in my moments of weariness, I refused to let go of what I had seen. Vision became my oxygen. Belief became my heartbeat. I would sit in the same small room where I first heard those words, but now I could see something invisible. I would close my eyes and imagine myself standing in front of a crowd, testifying about the miracle that had come from those very words. I could hear the applause, feel the gratitude, and see the tears of others who were inspired by what faith had done. Those mental images became so real that they began to rewrite my emotional reality. I was no longer the same person who had cried in despair that night. I had become someone reborn through belief. Slowly but surely, life began to mirror what I had seen in my spirit. People who once overlooked me began to ask for my advice. Ideas I had scribbled down started producing results. Income began to flow from unexpected directions. Every manifestation, every blessing, every open door traced back to the vision I had carried, the faith I had spoken, and the two words that had anchored it. I learned that the greatest wealth you can ever possess is not in what you hold, but in what you believe. Those two words had become a seed that turned my imagination into a prophecy and my faith into substance. What began as a whisper became a world. What started as a vision became visible. And all of it was born from a choice to believe in what I could not yet see. But let me tell you something. The moment you decide to live by faith, life will always test you. The moment you begin to walk toward your promise, storms rise to see if you truly believe what you say. I had declared those two words boldly, but soon after, I faced some of the hardest days of my life. The bills didn't stop coming. The people I had trusted withdrew their support. The same doors I thought would open seemed to shut even tighter. I found myself standing at the crossroads of faith and fear, asking, did I really hear from God? Were those two words truly meant for me? And yet, even in my questioning, I felt a quiet assurance within, a whisper reminding me that the test doesn't mean failure. It means preparation. It means preparation. There were nights when I could not sleep. I would pace the floor, praying those two words over and over, sometimes with tears streaming down my face. I was learning that faith is not proven in comfort but in pressure. It is in those moments when everything looks opposite to your prayer that your faith is forged in fire. I had to choose whether to believe my circumstances or to believe the word that had been spoken into my heart. Many times my emotions shouted louder than my spirit, but I kept returning to those two words. They became my anchor in the storm, holding me steady when everything else was shaking. There were times I wanted to give up, times when my heart felt heavy and my mind was weary from trying to figure it all out. But obedience kept me moving. I began to understand that obedience is the language of true faith. It's one thing to believe in your heart, but it's another to act on what you believe when nothing makes sense. I started giving even when I had very little. I started serving others even when I felt unseen. I sowed kindness when I needed it myself. Each act of obedience, though small, carried the fragrance of faith. It was as though heaven was watching every step, measuring not the size of my offering, but the strength of my trust. One particular day, I remember clearly, I was down to my last bit of money. I felt an inner prompting to give it to someone who was struggling more than I was. My mind fought it, telling me it was foolish, but my heart knew it was right. So I gave, not out of abundance, but out of obedience. And though I didn't receive anything immediate in return, peace flooded my spirit like a river. It was as if heaven smiled and said, "And now you are learning the secret." That small act taught me that miracles often hide behind moments of obedience. The blessing does not come when you hold back. It comes when you let go. Days turned into weeks, and while the outward situation still looked the same, my inner strength grew unshakable. I began to notice small signs, unexpected calls, sudden ideas, little breaks that gave me hope. These weren't coincidences. They were confirmations that faith, when tested, produces endurance. I realized that every delay was not denial, it was divine timing. God was building in me the character to carry the blessing I was asking for. If I had received it too early, I would not have been ready to handle it. As the test continued, I learned to praise even in pain, to speak faith even in famine, and to thank God even when I saw nothing. There were mornings I would wake up feeling empty, but I would still say, "I thank you, Lord, for the miracle I cannot yet see." I began to notice how obedience and gratitude walked hand in hand. Together they created a shield around my heart, keeping me steady and focused. I understood now that the test was not meant to break me. It was meant to prepare me for the weight of the blessing that was coming. And slowly something began to shift. My patience grew deeper, my faith stronger, my trust firmer. I stopped asking a when and started saying a thank you. I stopped worrying about timing and started focusing on alignment. Those two words that once felt like a promise now became a lifestyle. I lived them. I breathed them. They carried me through every trial. And one day, as I looked back, I realized that every tear, every disappointment, every test had been a stepping stone toward the miracle. Faith had not only sustained me, it had transformed me. The tests didn't come to destroy me. They came to reveal what was already inside me, the power to endure, to trust, and to keep believing when nothing made sense. It was in those moments of testing that the foundation of my success was being laid, brick by brick, through obedience, patience, and unwavering faith.